Welcome everybody to our page Facts and Videos. Today we are going to look over 50 true crimes you have never heard of before. Kearney was active in the 1970s in California, targeting young men and boys. He would shoot his victims, dismember their bodies, and dispose of them in trash bags along highways. Active from 1971 to 1983, Kraft killed at least 16 young men in California. He documented his murders on a coded list and often drugged, tortured, and sexually assaulted his victims before killing them. A truck driver who killed women at truck stops across several states, including Tennessee and Indiana. He was apprehended in 2007 with blood and a weapon in his truck. A truck driver who killed women at truck stops across several states, including Tennessee and Indiana. He was apprehended in 2007 with blood and a weapon in his truck. Active between 1977 and 1994, Naso killed women with matching initials for their first and last names, e.g., Roxine Rogesh. He documented details of his crimes in journals. A nurse who confessed to killing 40 patients by administering lethal doses of medication, though some estimates put his actual number of victims much higher. Knowles went on a killing spree in 1974 across multiple states, murdering both men and women. His victims ranged from elderly women to young children. Watts murdered women from 1974 to 1982 across several states. He was known for attacking women in their homes and was eventually convicted of multiple murders. Seda killed 3 people and injured others in New York City in the 1990s. He modeled his crimes after the Zodiac Killer and sent taunting letters to the police. A long-haul trucker, Rhodes abducted, tortured, and killed women in his truck, which was outfitted with a torture chamber. Known as the Blood Countess, Bathory was a Hungarian noblewoman in the late 16th century who allegedly tortured and killed young girls, bathing in their blood to retain her youth. A French serial killer who preyed on Western tourists in Southeast Asia during the 1970s, poisoning and killing at least 12 people. He was known for his charisma and manipulation skills. Although more famous now, Holmes was less known historically. He built a murder castle in Chicago during the 1890s World's Fair, where he lured and killed tourists. Keyes operated without a clear pattern, traveling across the U.S. to commit murders. He kept kill kits hidden in various locations and selected his victims at random. In the late 1990s, Francois killed 8 women and hid their bodies in his home in Poughkeepsie, New York. He was a known figure in the community, which helped him evade suspicion for some time. A German serial killer active from the 1950s to the 1970s, Kroll was a cannibal who killed at least 14 people, including children. He was caught after a plumbing issue revealed remains in his pipes. Thomas terrorized elderly women in Los Angeles from the 1970s to the 1980s, raping and strangling his victims. He was finally caught in 2009 through DNA evidence. This duo kidnapped, tortured, and killed an estimated 11 to 25 people in their bunker in California in the 1980s. They recorded some of their gruesome acts on video. a couple who lured women through Lonely Hearts ads in the 1940s, killing at least 17 victims. They were executed for their crimes. Coral, along with accomplices, lured and murdered at least 28 teenage boys in Texas during the early 1970s. He was known for offering candy to his victims. A hotel worker from Missouri who killed at least 12 women in the early 2000s. Travis documented his killings on videotapes, which were found after his arrest. Ray tortured and killed women in his soundproof trailer, which he called his toy box. He may have killed as many as 60 people, but many bodies were never found. A Brazilian killer who confessed to killing over 70 people, including criminals and gang members. He started his killing spree at the age of 14. Alcala appeared on a dating show while actively murdering women in California and New York. He took photos of his victims before killing them. Franklin killed at least 10 women in Los Angeles between 1985 and 2007, with a 14-year gap between some of his murders, earning him his nickname. Berdella tortured and killed at least 6 men in Kansas City in the 1980s, documenting his crimes in detail and keeping photographs of his victims. A British serial killer who murdered at least 8 women, including his wife, during the 1940s and 1950s in his London flat. He buried their bodies in his garden and walls. Sutcliffe was active in the 1970s and 1980s, killing 13 women and attacking several others in the UK. He targeted sex workers, claiming to be on a mission from God. A French serial killer who, along with his wife, murdered at least 12 girls and young women in France and Belgium from 1987 to 2003. Kemper killed 6 female college students, his grandparents, and his mother in the 1960s and 1970s. He was known for his large size and high intelligence. Wallace killed 10 women in Charlotte, North Carolina in the 1990s, most of whom were acquaintances or co-workers at fast food restaurants. Heidnik kidnapped, tortured, and held women captive in his Philadelphia basement in the 1980s, killing 2 of them. He claimed to be creating a baby farm to produce children. Lopez confessed to raping and killing over 300 young girls in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru in the 1970s and 1980s. He was released from prison in 1998. DeRusso, a former U.S. Army soldier, killed 7 women in the early 2000s, primarily in Jacksonville, Florida. He often used his position as a taxi driver to lure his victims. Prince killed 6 women in San Diego, California in the early 1990s, breaking into their homes and stabbing them. His killings sparked fear across the city until his capture. A Chicago-based serial killer who murdered 11 women between 1993 and 1999, targeting sex workers and drug addicts. He often revisited the crime scenes to have sex with their corpses. A nurse who killed at least 4 patients at the VA Medical Center in Massachusetts in the 1990s by administering lethal doses of epinephrine, causing cardiac arrest. Christopher killed 12 African American men in a spree from 1980 to 1981, motivated by racial hatred. He attacked victims in New York and Buffalo. Albright killed 3 women in Dallas, Texas, in the early 1990s. He was known for removing the eyes of his victims with surgical precision. While more well-known now due to media, Wuornos was less known during her spree. She killed 7 men in Florida in 1989 to 1990, claiming they tried to rape her while she was working as a prostitute. Ridgway confessed to killing 71 women in Washington state in the 1980s and 1990s, many of whom were sex workers. He often returned to the crime scenes to have sex with the corpses. Sowell was active in Cleveland, Ohio, from 2007 to 2009. He lured vulnerable women, often struggling with addiction or homelessness, to his home, where he raped, strangled, and killed them. Police discovered the remains of 11 women in and around his house when they investigated a missing persons case. Gargiulo, active from the 1990s to 2008, attacked and killed young women in California and Illinois. He would stalk his victims, break into their homes, and stab them repeatedly. His victims included Ashton Kutcher's girlfriend, Ashley Ellerin, in 2001, Greenwood terrorized Los Angeles in the 1970s, targeting homeless men on Skid Row. He would slash their throats and perform ritualistic acts with their bodies, including sprinkling salt around them. Greenwood was convicted of killing 11 men. Brown, who was convicted of 2 murders, has claimed responsibility for up to 48 killings across the United States. His murders spanned from 1970 to 1995, and his victims included both men and women, whom he strangled, stabbed, or shot. Johnson went on a killing spree in 1983 in Will County, Illinois, murdering at least 10 people in a series of brutal attacks over just 2 months. He targeted couples, construction workers, and others, using guns and knives to kill. Active in Minnesota in the early 1980s, Stephanie would call police after his murders, crying and begging for them to stop him. He killed 3 women and injured others, attacking his victims with a tire iron and stabbing them. A former NFL player, Rozier became involved with a black supremacist cult called the Brotherhood, which encouraged members to kill white people. Between 1985 and 1986, Rozier killed 7 people in California, often targeting individuals at random. Hansen abducted women, took them to the Alaskan wilderness, and hunted them for sport. He was active from the 1970s to the early 1980s and confessed to 17 murders. Bonin, along with several accomplices, raped, tortured, and killed at least 21 boys and young men in California between 1979 and 1980. He would abduct his victims from streets and highways before murdering them in his van. Resendez was a Mexican serial killer who rode trains across the United States, hopping off to break into homes near the tracks. He murdered at least 15 people from 1986 to 1999, using rocks, a pickaxe, and other blunt instruments to bludgeon his victims.